So I'm going to react live to Sean Strickland's current weigh-ins that I'm watching right now at the UFC's YouTube page, right? They're obviously doing a ceremonial weigh-in as they did the official weigh-in this particular morning. And while I'm doing that, I wanted to talk about Sean Strickland's possible trajectory in his career if he were to lose. Now, we all know that in a position that Sean Strickland is currently at, he is undoubtedly a superstar. Somebody that is seen as the anti-hero, or sort of as like what I had mentioned in previous episodes as the Stone Cold Steve Austin of mixed martial arts, and in a very modern way. So because of that, this is what he has earned through his victory over Israel Adesanya. And because of this victory, well, it allowed him to build a platform to which he had that current controversy with, what was that guy's name? El-Kheer of MMAfighting.com. And not only that, here's something that I can honestly report on, and very few people have seen it, I would imagine. El-Kheer mentioned that he did go after Sean Strickland on purpose because he felt that Sean Strickland was phobic of certain people, so he wanted to confront him on that. So El-Kheer admitted his biasness towards Sean Strickland. Speaking of which, we're now watching the end of Raquel Pennington and Silva's face-off, ceremonial weigh-ins. Now they're playing the video package of Sean Strickland, and I gotta tell you, if he loses this fight, all the superstardom that he has going on, it could literally fade into obscurity. He's going to go back to fighting in the Apex because, quite frankly, as popular as he is, he's a potential risk for the business of the UFC, especially in the era that they are currently in, which is what? The Walt Disney era. So is that a little bit different than, let's say, in previous... Let me lower this down so this way we're not overlapping what is going on. So this is something that you have to understand with Sean Strickland, is that he is risky business. Even though we are in a business of meritocracy where the only things that matter is wins and losses, and the person who has the belt, guess what, has the platform. But even if you lose, you still have a certain platform that, let's say, others who've never held the title. Even Dustin Poirier is a great example of that. He was only an interim champion, but because of his wins over Conor McGregor twice in a row in the same year in two different regions of the world, one in Abu Dhabi and then the other in Las Vegas, to finish him off with a leg break. I mean, that right there just sent Dustin Poirier to a different stratosphere if he wasn't already. But Sean Strickland, I think, is not going to have that same trajectory as Dustin Poirier, and I'm going to tell you why. Unfortunately, Sean Strickland will be suppressed, okay? So in other words, don't be surprised if he goes back to main eventing Apex cards. And again, the pay-per-view numbers are going to tell the story tomorrow when this fight is over, with the gates coming in and everything of that nature. But I gotta tell you, I think that the success of the gate for this particular fight with Sean Strickland is predicated on the fact that Canadians trust the brand of the UFC. Now, in some cities, I gotta tell you, I don't think you could sell out a UFC card in Dublin if there's no Conor McGregor involved. That's just the true to God honesty, and maybe that's the reason why they have never gone back to Ireland, and in particular in Dublin, to do a pay-per-view as of yet. But who knows? In the future, we'll see. But for Sean Strickland, this is a must-win. If he doesn't win, he eventually just fades into obscurity. Now, he's still going to have a base of fans, but this type of attention that he's garnered right now is so negative that I think that it's going to fire back on him. Now, look, I'm speaking from an objective point of view. I'm not telling you that that's what I want or that's what I wish to see. that's just from an analytical point of view of understanding public relations and sports marketing and the sports business in total. So Sean Strickland has to definitely win this. Now, for Dricus du Plessis, if he was to lose, guess what? I think it would be an even bigger downfall for him. Never mind Sean Strickland. But Sean Strickland is so big right now that it seems that he has more to lose. So hold on, let me see if I can... I'm going to put my headphones on this so I can react to Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis. All right. So, Dricus du Plessis right now, in the current moment of time, as I am reacting to Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis' weigh-in. Okay? So why did I say that it would be a bigger downfall for Dricus du Plessis? As for Sean Strickland, yes, it would be a big fall, but he would still keep a certain base. Because with Dricus, he never really had that top name other than Robert Whittaker. Now, Robert Whittaker is a big name. It's a huge win. But to be honest, the way that Robert Whittaker got knocked out, you could imagine he's probably going to get knocked out the same way in the future with a different opponent. Eventually, it's going to happen. But you can rest assured if Robert Whittaker was to go back and fight right now, he would probably fight a little bit more tentative and, well, very methodical and slow and hesitant. So right now, Sean Strickland is looking at Dricus du Plessis with his hands down. Now he's putting his hands up, and they just had the face-off for the weigh-ins, and now the challenger, South African Dricus du Plessis, is being interviewed by Jon Anik. Let's listen to this. Yeah, it's crazy. They have ads on YouTube as this is going on. Let's hear what Dricus du Plessis said now with the ads being gone. So Dricus is now being interviewed by Jon Anik. He said he has no predictions. Be careful what you wish for. He said your wish has been granted, my friend. And now Jon Anik walks over to Sean Strickland, talks to him. Sean Strickland wraps his arms around Jon Anik, and he said, I'm just surprised in Canada they let me have a microphone. He said that he's going to war for you guys in Canada. And that is it. So let's continue on with what I was talking about with why Sean Strickland needs to win this and why he could potentially fall into obscurity if he were to lose this fight. Now, I had already mentioned that he is risky business. Is he popular? Yes. But you also have to understand that there is a subculture in MMA that is very hard to penetrate, which is what? Let's be honest about something. There's a certain type of people that people in the MMA world just don't like. Okay? And I'm not here to comment one way or another. I just need you to understand this. That for people who go against it, the reason for that is because it's a hyper-masculine based culture and a sport. Nothing more, nothing less. And with anybody that has a problem with that, well, look, let's be honest, right? It's an unspoken thing. And it just so happens that Sean Strickland seems to be the most unspoken guy about it. And as a result of that, well, he becomes a negative target for the company's bottom dollar at some certain instances, if let's say they're talking about sponsorship. But at the same time, like I said, The UFC is also impenetrable to where they have a base of fans that, let's just be honest, really think this way. And rightfully so. Why would they not? It's a hyper masculine based sport. Nothing more, nothing less. And that is just what the world outside of it just needs to learn. And also, if the rest of the world doesn't want to be involved in a sport that has this type of toxic male behavior in some kind of way, well, they don't have to watch it. But rest assured, when there's a big event that is going on, whether it's a mainstream highlighted event such as a Conor McGregor event, maybe Khabib coming back, maybe John Jones fight, maybe a John Jones with a Tom Aspinall fight, a Francis Ngannou, all these things in particular are still going to draw the casual fans in. So even though there is a certain subgroup of base of, let's say, MMA followers, or in particular UFC pay-per-view buyers and viewers every week on their fight nights all the way to their numbered pay-per-view cards, rest assured that they're always going to thrive. The UFC thrives, believe it or not, mostly on their fight night shows, maybe even more so than, let's say, their top pay-per-view fights all throughout the year. And let me explain why. Because the UFC fight nights are a staple. They get their money from their sponsorships. They get it from Prime. That's one example. ESPN. They get a certain base salary. More sponsorships that you would see on the canvas, and other outside commercials that they have going on that basically just generates revenue for them on a weekly basis. One for one fight week, and then another fight week, and then somewhere maybe twice, maybe just once a month, you'll have a pay-per-view. Okay, the pay-per-view, once again, is not the biggest bottom dollar of them all. So guess what? They're going to continue to maintain a certain base of fans. But they also know that within those casual spaces of, let's say, casual MMA fans, or just onlookers, or just casual observers, hence the name casuals, the bottom line about that is they're always going to be around, especially if the matchups are compelling enough. Again, they're always going to have that. But they're always going to have a base of fans that are going to watch. So that is why the long-winded answer of the UFC allowing their fighters to be able to say what they want. Because they know that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to agree with them, a base followers of them that are going to agree with it. Of course, the mainstream crowd is going to go against it. They're not going to like it. They're not going to be in favorable of it. But rest assured, when you have a sport that is so violent and so insanely extreme for the likes of mixed martial arts, then what happens is that you are now in a position where you garner people with the same type of attitude. In other words, they're going to have those base followers of people that are going to keep their company sustained on a weekly basis. Sure, the casual fans may not come around on regular fight nights with a no pay-per-view number on them, okay, or an Apex card, but guess what? The guys that love violence, that love to see people get knocked out, or basically a lot of people out there that just love to train and love to see the techniques evolve and learn from them, and probably use them on a weekly basis throughout their weekly training habits, they're going to all be intrigued by it. These are the base followers that I'm talking about. But the casual audience, they vary. And they're always going to come around no matter what. So that is the leverage that the UFC has over the world. However, still, Sean Strickland, his whole entire shtick right now works because he wins, plain and simple. And if he doesn't win, then unfortunately, it's just going to be back to the Apex cards for him. So the choice is his. For Dricus du Plessis, what does this happen for him if he wins. I tell you what, this opens up a big fight, possibly a 300 fight with Israel Adesanya, because yes, Sean Strickland can still be a choice for UFC 300 against Israel Adesanya, but guess what? Dricus du Plessis winning against Sean Strickland, on top of the trash talk that him and Israel Adesanya had last summer, I think is really going to sell a lot of tickets. So that is one consideration that I think many people have to understand, is that it could be catastrophic for the brand of Dricus du Plessis. Not so much catastrophic, right? But enough to where it stunts his growth as a superstar. But if he wins, and I'm talking about Dricus du Plessis, he becomes a superstar by default and virtually overnight. Why? Because there's Israel Adesanya, the rivalry that he has waiting for him, but he also has to become the first South African world champion of the UFC, which in and of itself is a huge accomplishment for a man in his region. Because think about it, nobody has been a South African champion. And with that, well, to be honest with you, is going to garner a lot of controversy. For one, you got to understand, right? He's a South African man, okay? Somebody who doesn't really look like Israel Adesanya. Take that into consideration. And there's a controversy already behind what had happened during the summer. You know, when Israel Adesanya walked in the cage, walked up to him after the Robert Whittaker knockout, which, by the way, Israel Adesanya ironically had predicted. He said, I'm just going to put it in the air that he's going to somehow knock out Dricus du Plessis, and lo and behold, he did. And when that happened, he walked in there and he said, by the way, premeditatedly, I'm going to walk up in there and I'm going to call him the N-word. Okay, he said this to his brother on a YouTube page of his months prior to that particular Dricus du Plessis knockout of Robert Whittaker. And he said he wanted to do that to make him feel like one of us by calling Dricus the N-word. So it caused a lot of controversy. Unfortunately, that fight was supposed to be a setup for UFC Sydney. You see, the UFC loves it when you go and you turn around straight away. So this is something you really have to take into consideration, is that it is a company that wants you to turn around quickly because they need you for the next big card. And then, as you know, with the Saudis coming in, now it's another big card after another big card. Because you got to remember, the Saudis were already instructed to do a show with the UFC in March, but they declined and put it down because I think March obviously is going to be Ramadan. On top of that, they wanted to push it to June because they wanted a bigger June card. As you could imagine, Islam Makhachev is going to headline UFC Saudi Arabia in June at some point. So with that in mind, Sean Strickland has to win in order for him to get into UFC 300. And how is he going to win and get into UFC 300? Come out unscathed. And if he's able to come out unscathed, well, then I think he can move on and fight at UFC 300 with a big name such as Israel Adesanya. Now, that could be exciting for a UFC 300. Let me know what you think on the comment section below, if that is an exciting card. But we all know it's not as exciting as Dricus du Plessis against Israel Adesanya. And let me tell you why. Throughout all the years of combat sports, racial tension sells big money for combat sports. You can't deny it. You can go back as far as Max Schmeling, a guy who fought for Germany during Germany's most controversial times in the 1940s during World War II. He was called all types of things. On top of that, they put him against an African-American fighter, which, by the way, sold a lot of numbers for great reason. Now, what about with Khabib and Conor McGregor when they fought? It did great numbers. Why? For the same reason that people love the controversy and the contrast between two guys that come from two different worlds. Just like that song in Rocky IV, when they both train for each other, Ivan Drago and Rocky. It's like two worlds collide, rival nations. It's East meets West type of scenario as the song portrays its lyrics into what is going on between these two men, coming from two different worlds. One man asking for revenge for what he did to his good friend Apollo Creed, and then the other man wants to avenge, well, not so much avenge, but continue the honor of his nation, of the Soviet Union, in Ivan Drago. It's really a story that we can all relate to in terms of understanding our attachment to tribalism. So with that in mind, Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya is just a way better fight, in not just on paper, but also by terms of pay-per-view numbers. Sean Strickland, this is why I say this going back to my point. Sean Strickland will only be powerful in his media influence if he continues winning. Because prior to this, they were content with just throwing him on a lot of these fight night cards in the Apex Center of all places. Not exactly superstar quality. You got to remember, Conor McGregor couldn't fight in a pandemic because for the UFC, in their mind, it felt like it was beneath them to put Conor McGregor in such scenario. Whereas with Sean Strickland, guess what? When he was fighting in those quote-unquote gym fights or quote-unquote the fight nights of the Apex Centers, he was learning, increasing his skill set in ways that, let's say, somebody like Conor McGregor in a few weight classes below could never even obtain because of his superstardom. And then here comes Israel Adesanya, who himself is also an active champion, but guess what? Is now being matched by somebody who's also an active contender, fighting in these venues. Well, yeah, it's a UFC event, but still it's a venue in a gym for them to cut some sort of costs and a tradition that they had just followed from the days of the pandemic and never really left it, unless, of course, they were going to go to a bigger city and host an event there for a regular fight night. They still have those. Back in the days, they had fight nights for some random town in Virginia. And then before that, they had one for Macau with Michael Bisping and Chung Lee. So Sean Strickland has to win this. He was never even the guy that was slated to be part of that particular event in the first place. Remember that. They wanted Dricus du Plessis and Israel Adesanya to fight because guess what? It was big money. Why? Because, as I had mentioned, Max Schmeling, fighting African-American fighters, and he was a German fighter fighting at the time of Germany's most controversial time. And it sold. And every generation where you have that going on, those types of fights always sold. Ray Mercer versus Tommy Morrison, a.k.a. Tommy Gunn. Fights like that, they sell. For obvious reasons, especially when there is a race baiting aspect to it involved. And it goes even with African Americans versus Mexicans in boxing, Puerto Ricans versus Mexicans in boxing. The variations go on. But the same thing with Khabib and Conor McGregor. You had a guy who was basically teasing Khabib of his religion, and on top of that, playing the crusade role into the whole scenario. And all of a sudden, this controversy that's surrounded by dollies being thrown, people being involved in gang fights, people being involved with world leaders, and people being involved with criminal organizations and things of this nature. I mean, it was a story that you can't deny as just a blockbuster hit. And it is no wonder that it did big numbers. So this is why they never really wanted Sean Strickland in the first place. Now, him being a former, well, how do I say this, neo-Nazi, right? In LA, being part of the Aryan Brotherhood and whatnot. Did that play a role in Izzy in his fight? Yes and no, but not in a way that it would for Dricus du Plessis. And let me explain why. Now, Sean being a former Nazi, is that big? Yes, it's a big storyline. However, I think that he was such an insignificant type of figure in MMA that it really didn't translate to casual interest. And you have to really understand that, right? Nobody was really clamoring to see Sean Strickland fight. He accepted a fight against Israel Adesanya in September, 5 weeks notice, on the basis of knowing that he was not the first choice. And of course, Dricus, as we found out, had an injury at that time, so he was not able to jump in there and continue. Now, moving on, now that Sean won, he became an unexpected superstar for the UFC. So as a result, if you're Israel Adesanya right now, even though you're coming off of a loss against Sean Strickland, you're coming off of two possible best fights of your life. All by coming off of a loss by a decision. I'm talking about Israel Adesanya. Now, why is that? Let me explain. For one, Sean Strickland was not a big money fight from the beginning. We all thought that Israel Adesanya going in, he was going to wash Sean Strickland. Is that what happened? No. Sean Strickland showed that he was a lot better than what we had expected. Not only a lot better, but had just really created such massive, huge improvements that it showed he belonged in the world championship levels right now. So that is really important to understand. And when he did that, he also took the package of his entire controversy that is surrounding him. And as a result, it allowed him to propel himself as a top superstar in the world of the UFC and in the world of mixed martial arts and combat sports in general, but also transcended him into a mainstream figure for, let's say, what you would consider the silent majority of America. People that feel a certain way miss the sense of hyper-masculinity of the Mel Gibson days, the falling down Michael Douglas days of America. That's what Sean Strickland represented in a lot of people that support him. But I stand by what I said. He still needs to win in order for him to keep that going. Because his story, and as remarkable as it is, was all predicated on the win. With Israel Adesanya, he didn't need to win. The guy is already a superstar. There are some guys in this business that don't really need to win, that will continue to garner our attention with even 10 losses in a row with the likes of Tony Ferguson, Conor McGregor, BJ Penn, Chuck Liddell, and the list goes on down to Randy Couture. You would still continue to watch these guys fight. But there are guys that really need to win. Now, is Khabib a guy that, well, I think at this point it doesn't matter, but him retiring undefeated and him being undefeated his whole entire career, I think really gave him that identity that he had just naturally earned. But for Sean Strickland, he really needs the win. Because Israel Adesanya is coming off of a loss. and he's looking at 2 big fights in front of him right now. Don't forget to like and subscribe, as I gave you guys the best detail and breakdown reaction of this weigh-in and face-off. But not only that, gave you some of the analysis that is involved in future matchmaking in this particular scenario of the 185 division. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the most epic mixed martial arts channel in the history of mankind.